it's Alex, the Bookubus. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books I read in September, and I read 7 books in total. Before I talk about the books though, I did want to mention a new booktube channel. This is Caleb. I will leave a link below, and yeah, I believe he reads quite widely, but he's definitely going through a horror kick right now, so that's awesome. He's a pretty new channel, he just has a handful of videos up right now, but I have been enjoying his videos so far. I look forward to seeing more, and yeah, please do go check his channel out and subscribe. So on to the books that I read in September. I read 7 books in total, a couple of horror novels, a couple of non-horror novels, and a couple of vintage YA horror novels. So yeah, I had a good mixture, and overall it was a good reading month. First up, I read Tommy and the Order of Cosmic Champions by Anthony D. Grate and Anthony J. Rapino, and I was sent a copy of the book for review by the authors, so thank you to them. And yeah, my review of course is still my honest thoughts, and I really enjoyed this one. So this is not horror, it is a middle grade novel. It is quite long, it's like 300-400 pages long, but I think would be, you know, readable by a child of that age. And it's about an 11-year-old boy, Tommy. I think he's just coming up to his 12th birthday, and he is, yeah, dealing with some life stuff. His best friend is like all of a sudden not wanting to be his friend anymore, and his parents are going through some relationship difficulties. He's being bullied at school, and yeah, there's just a bunch of things going on in his life that aren't great. And basically it starts off at the end of the school year and going into the summer holidays, and he's, yeah, looking forward to this awesome summer before going back to school in September. But yeah, things don't pan out the way he hoped they would. And anyway, he is a big fan of the Order of Cosmic Champions, which is kind of like a He-Man type of cartoon on TV. There's also comic books and toys, etc. It's something he's been obsessed with for ages and is a big fan of. And one day he sees there is a competition to design a new character, and he's like, yeah, this is my dream, this is my time to shine, I'm totally gonna win this. But, and this is in the synopsis, it's not like a spoiler per se, but he doesn't win the competition. And so he ends up going on this journey, doing something that he thinks is the thing he should do in this situation, as his life is, you know, kind of falling apart around him, seemingly. But yeah, it ends up being like a journey of self-discovery and making friends, and it all culminates on Halloween night. So yeah, there's a lot of good Halloween stuff going on here. And yeah, this is set in the 1980s, so there's a very strong 80s vibe, lots of great nostalgia here. It felt very authentic and just really felt like a part of the story. It didn't feel like the references were, you know, shoehorned in there to try and set the scene. It felt very organic and really well done. And the character of Tommy was fantastic. He was very relatable, and yeah, the things that he was going through, yeah, were emotional to read at times. Like, I definitely got quite teary-eyed on more than one occasion. I think there's a really interesting cast of characters here as well. We do also get some chapters told from the perspectives of other characters, some of which are adults. So yeah, we do get some adult perspectives as well as child's perspective. Yeah, which I thought worked really well. So most of the story is real world type stuff, but there is a fantasy element that comes in related to characters from the Order of Cosmic Champions that, yeah, becomes a part of Tommy's story. So yeah, I did think that worked well. Like, fantasy isn't really my go-to genre. You know, it definitely felt like something that worked for, you know, the target audience for this story. And yeah, it was just a really good coming of age story about, yeah, finding yourself and kind of, yeah, going on this journey of self-discovery and yeah, making friends along the way. yeah, it was really touching and really well done. I did really enjoy it, and I gave this one 4 stars. And this is a new release, so you should be able to get this now or soon. Yeah, I definitely recommend checking it out if it sounds interesting to you. Next up, I read This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno, and this was sent to me by my friend Briar, who, yeah, highly recommended it to me. So yeah, thank you so much, because I loved it. I read this as a buddy read with my friend Emily, and yeah, we both loved it. So yeah, I'm now passing this on as a recommendation to any of you who have not read it. This was a 4.5 star read for me, and will, yeah, definitely be one of my favourites of the year. And this is a really interesting one, because the only thing I knew about it going in was that it was something to do with a smart speaker. So kind of like some weird supernatural-esque things going on related to this smart speaker that, you know, seemingly had like a mind of its own. That's all I knew really going in, which sounded interesting. And yeah, that element of the story was really well done. It might sound a bit hokey, but it really wasn't at all. It was eerie and unsettling. And yeah, there were some very creepy scenes that play out in the story. But the other, like the big element of the story that I wasn't necessarily aware of going in was that it's about death. It's about the death of a loved one, losing a loved one, and the grief that comes with that, and yeah, just how life changes when something like that happens and that person is no longer there. And so the main character here is Tiago. It's all told from his point of view, and he is basically talking to his wife Vera, who died. And it was, yeah, very, like the way that the author talked about grief and losing a loved one was, yeah, you could definitely tell that he has been through something like that, because it felt very, very genuine. And I did read that, yeah, I think the author did lose someone close to him, and so that became a big part of this story. And yeah, he did a really excellent job in translating that process and those feelings to words on a page. And so we're basically following his life and his kind of thoughts as, yeah, as life goes on, and some things that play out along the way. So some of it is related to this smart speaker situation. So we have a bit of a supernatural, or potentially supernatural, element to the story. There's also like a bit of cosmic horror in here, but I wouldn't want that to deter anyone that doesn't think they like cosmic horror. There's also like a bit of maybe folk horror in here as well. And yeah, just so many like interesting ideas and really strong visuals. It was really, really well done. A very impressive debut. I very much look forward to seeing what Gus Moreno does next. And yeah, this was just such a great read. Like, I will say it did take me a little bit to get into, but once I was into it, I was like, wow, how was I not into this from the beginning? I don't know, because once I was hooked in, yeah, it was such an absorbing story. Very well written. My friend Emily and I, when we were talking about it as we were reading, she described his writing as deceptively simple, which I think was, yeah, a perfect description, because, yeah, on the surface it feels maybe like, you know, simple-ish writing style, but it's very clever. There's much more to it than that. There are also like very cleverly done like breadcrumbs throughout the story, that it's only, you know, later in the book that you realise, oh, now I understand the importance of that. So yeah, it was just such a well done book on so many levels. It was wonderful. 4.5 stars, highly recommend. Then I picked up a vintage horror novel. This was Suffer the Children by Saul. And he's an author that I've been meaning to pick up for a really long time, and I've like amassed a handful of his books on my shelves, but for whatever reason I just never kind of like reached for one. Basically, I should have picked up his work sooner because I thought this one was excellent. I did end up going with this one because it seems to be like his most well-known one, his most popular, highly rated one. So I figured, you know, this would be like a good example of his work to see if I wanted to read more. And yeah, at this point, I definitely do want to read more. So this one is about a family. We've got a husband and wife and their 2 daughters, Elizabeth and Sarah. And their family has been in this, you know, small town or village, you know, for generations. So they're kind of like well known in the area. And so there is like a generational aspect to the story and like, you know, kind of dark family history type of thing. And basically we find out that something awful happened to one of the daughters, Sarah, the younger one. And since then she hasn't spoken and she is prone to various outbursts, but otherwise is just quiet and withdrawn. And she does go to like a special school, but yeah, quite a lot of time has passed since the incident and she still hasn't, you know, kind of progressed or, you know, gotten back to her old self, as it were. Anyway, there's another child in the village that claims she had been attacked or something, and so, you know, at some point people's thoughts turn to Sarah because she has some issues. You know, there's that perception of, well, obviously they're a bad person now. And anyway, this kid, you know, won't say anything about what happened, and won't say who it was. And then later on in the story, another kid actually goes missing and isn't found. And again, there are thoughts pointing to Sarah. Yeah, I don't want to say any more about this one. It was really, really good though. And it gets dark in places. Like there are some gnarly, gruesome scenes that happen here that I was not expecting, because otherwise it's that, you know, quiet, slow burn, small town, family focused type of horror story. It's very, you know, very 70s. But yeah, when it hits these scenes of the messed up stuff happening, it goes there. So yeah, I really liked that mix of the 2 types of horror going on, the, you know, the quiet dread, and then these like genuinely shocking moments that occur, you know, all related to, yeah, something happening to children. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. I don't want to spoil it. It is one of those things that, like, you know fairly early on what is happening, but even so, I still don't want to say what it is, because I think, yeah, I totally recommend this one. I think you should pick this up and check it out for yourself. Yeah, if you like creepy children type of stories, then this is definitely one to pick up. Yeah, I thought this was great and I gave it 4 stars. And yeah, I look forward to reading more John Saul. Next up, I read Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, and this is a vampire novel, but I knew going into it that it's not really a horror novel, it's more of like an urban fantasy. And yeah, I thought this one was okay. It wasn't my favourite of the month, although it wasn't my least favourite. That one's still to come. But yeah, this is about a teenage boy, Domingo, who lives on the streets of Mexico. This is kind of like either a, you know, an alternate world or like a futuristic world that we know it, and basically vampires are known and certain cities allow them to live there, but certain cities, you know, vampires are strictly forbidden from. We also learned that there are different types of vampires. And anyway, Domingo, yeah, is this street kid. He basically collects rubbish for a living, and one day he meets Atle, who is a vampire, and she's very beautiful and he's very intrigued by her. And yeah, they end up kind of striking up some sort of relationship / friendship, and you know, he is, you know, gonna help her because she is basically on the run. She comes from a family of vampires, and yeah, some of them were killed, and now she is on the hunt for revenge against this other vampire family that were responsible for her family's death. And so yeah, so we're following that story, and I guess the progression of Domingo and Athel's relationship, and also, yeah, other vampires that we meet along the way. So yeah, I did like certain elements of this one. I liked the concept of, yeah, the different types of vampires, and I also liked the setting. You know, I've never read a vampire story set in Mexico City, so that was awesome. I liked some of the characters as well. I thought they were well done. But yeah, I think the things that didn't really work for me, so kind of the backdrop here is that it's, you know, it's set kind of like in the drug world. So these vampire families are, you know, basically drug lords, and they have, you know, rival drug cartels, and that's just not really something that interests me. So the fact that that was kind of the backdrop to the story, yeah, didn't really grab me. Also, basically the whole reason that Domingo really does anything for Athel is because he thinks she's beautiful and that he has the hots for her. You know, it was just a bit kind of cringe, I guess, a bit Twilight. You know, it just was something that I didn't think, you know, because as far as I know, this is an adult novel, rather than aimed at YA, so it just kind of seemed like a very YA trope to have in an adult novel. And yeah, it just didn't really work for me, I guess. So yeah, it kind of had a couple of things that just weren't really my thing. But you know, I read the whole thing. It was still interesting enough for me to keep reading. But yeah, I just feel like it was just down to kind of like personal tastes that some of those elements weren't really my thing. I did like the ending though. I did think it wrapped up things well, and yeah, I did like the ending, so that's good. I guess one other point to mention is there's another kind of character that becomes part of the story who's a detective in Mexico City, and yeah, she is looking into these, you know, the fact that there are potentially vampires in the city and what is she going to do about it, because she used to live elsewhere, so she does have some experience with vampires. So yeah, so I thought it had some interesting things going on, but yeah, it just overall maybe wasn't my thing. But I ended up giving this one 3 stars. So yeah, if it sounds interesting to you, then I would still recommend checking it out. Next up, I read a short story collection. This was Departures by Scott Cole, and the author did send me a copy of this for review, so thank you, Scott. And yeah, again, honest thoughts as always. And yeah, I thought this was an interesting collection. There were definitely some really unique ideas going on here, which I really enjoyed. And I think the general vibe of the collection is, I would say, is horror / speculative fiction with a bit of weirdness in there as well. Yeah, so some of them are more of that kind of weird edge to them. I think my favourite 2, let me check the names. One was Only Bad People, which is about a guy who moves to a new town, and when he's kind of wandering around, he sees this wall, and basically finds out that on the other side of the wall is a cemetery, but he keeps walking along this wall and he can't actually seem to find an entrance. And yeah, the story goes from there. I really, really enjoyed this one. It was definitely a highlight for me. I thought it was, yeah, dark and creepy and unsettling. It had a bit of an Italian horror film vibe to it, which is one of my favourite things. So yeah, that definitely did it for me. And my other favourite was The Penanggalan, which is about a couple who go on holiday to, if I'm remembering correctly, Malaysia. And while on the journey, the guy character reads about this thing called the Penanggalan, which is kind of like a local vampire legend. And yeah, anyway, when they arrive at their destination, yeah, maybe maybe he ends up coming face to face with one of them. Yeah, I really like this one too. It was, yeah, just a really great story. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I feel like a couple of the stories, they were all good stories, don't get me wrong. There wasn't a bad story at all in the bunch, not even close. They were all well worth a read, but just some of them didn't, yeah. Some of them were just good rather than great for me personally, but I did think they were all very well written. There were great ideas here. Yeah, definitely some unique things going on in this collection that I really enjoyed. So I gave this one 3.5 stars. You know, I do feel like I try to kind of rate the stories individually and then give it, you know, an average. So that's still a good rating for a short story collection in my eyes. So yeah, I would recommend checking this out, and I look forward to, yeah, reading some more of his work. I know he also wrote Triple Axe, which I've heard a few people mention and say they enjoyed. So yeah, maybe I'll have to check that one out, or I'll definitely keep an eye out on what he does next. Okay, 2 more books to talk about, and they're both vintage YA horror. The first one is The Girlfriend by R.L. Stine. And this was not only my least favourite book of the month, but also my least favourite point horror book thus far. I've been working my way through reading/rereading them over a few years now. I've still got some to read, but yeah, I did not like this one at all. It was really bad. So this one is told from a teenage boy's perspective. So there's this guy Scotty and his girlfriend Laura. They've been together for ages and they're both very popular at school, and they're, you know, they've got their whole lives ahead of them. They basically have like a successful life laid out for them. And anyway, Laura goes away on a holiday with her parents for a week. I think it's a week. Bear that in mind. It wasn't a long time that she was gone. And anyway, during this time, Scotty randomly meets this other girl at school that he's never really noticed before, Shannon, and he ends up going on a date with her. And it's implied that things happen. I'll just say that. And anyway, he has no intention of seeing her again. It was just a one-night thing. That's it. He is, you know, still in love with his girlfriend Laura. But Shannon doesn't see it that way. And she's like, no, you're my baby now. So basically the majority of the story is a very repetitive back and forth between Scotty and Shannon of her saying, you're my baby now, and him saying, no, I'm not. So yeah, part of my problem with the story was just that it was very repetitive and therefore boring. Another thing I didn't like about it was that it's kind of like, I guess, coming from a place of, you know, don't stick your dick in crazy, I guess, is what it's kind of leaning towards, when really it should be more of a maybe keep it in your pants for 5 minutes. Just a thought. But yeah, I'll go into some more spoilery stuff now because I don't recommend reading it. So if you're curious to hear what happens, then keep watching. If you really would like to check this out for yourself and you don't want to be spoiled, then you can skip ahead to the next book. But yeah, one thing I wanted to mention, there's not really any like suspense here. Yeah, I just didn't find there was very much substance to the story. There wasn't really any like suspense or creepy moments or any of the thing that you normally, you know, you would want from a point horror book. And yeah, the only thing that they have of that nature was that there was not 1 but 2 animal deaths, you know, which were just kind of shoehorned in there unnecessarily. Anyway, so towards the end, big spoilers, Scotty finally has it out with Shannon and is like, look, love, it's not happening. They end up getting into a fight, it gets physical, and he basically thinks he's killed her. So, yikes. There's also then a bit of victim blaming going on because, yeah, of course it was all her fault. And then, so there was actually an interesting scene that plays out towards the end, I'll give it that. But he decides to take Shannon's body to his girlfriend's house, who is now back in town. But yeah, for reasons I won't bother going into, he decides he's going to drop Shannon's body off in the basement of his girlfriend's house until he can like figure stuff out. But when he gets there and he's like carrying, you know, her limp body, he's greeted with his girlfriend, friends and family who are there to give him a surprise birthday party. And so they're all like, what the fuck's going on? Who is this? And why is she lifeless? So I thought that was interesting. I was like, oh, okay, now the story is finally something is happening. But no. So it then turns out that there's been this guy keeping an eye on Scotty and Shannon because Shannon did something in the past which meant she had gone to some kind of juvie, and this guy suspected that she was going to be doing something weird again. So now he is going to take her away to get her the help she needs because she's troubled in some way. So there's that. And then the worst thing about the story was just that basically life goes back to normal for Scotty. No one really seems to care about what he did, and his girlfriend and him seem to just get back to normal in a moment, which just really sucked as a way to end the story. And basically when Scotty thinks he's killed Shannon, you know, things are flashing through his mind. He's like, oh my God, you know, I have my whole life ahead of me. You know, I can't ruin it just because of, you know, this stupid girl or whatever. And yeah, it just, the whole thing just grossed me out basically. And I know this is a YA book from the 90s. I shouldn't, you know, think too much about it and try and compare it to today's standards, etc, etc. I know, but it's hard to not do that when there's content like this in it. It's very problematic and just gross in many ways, basically. You know, there's a lot of problematic stuff that I read that I can still enjoy the story for what it is and still have a good time with it. But yeah, this was just one. Even the problematic stuff aside, it wasn't a good story. Like I said, it was very boring and repetitive. So yeah, there just wasn't really anything to like about this one. I ended up giving it 1 star. Okay, and last up, I did end the month on a better note, thankfully. I then picked up The Game by Les Logan, and this was one of the books from the Dark Forces series, which came out in the 1980s. And this is about, yeah, as you can probably tell from the cover, there's a Ouija board involved. So it's about twin sisters, Julie and Terry, and there's an accident at the beginning of the story which results in Julie being in a wheelchair, and she becomes very withdrawn and doesn't want to see her boyfriend or her friends anymore, and she just spends a lot of time alone in her room. And anyway, she ends up with a Ouija board and she contacts someone or something that she ends up, yeah, spending a lot of time with and having a lot of conversations with. So yeah, there's definitely a bit of an Exorcist vibe to this one. You know, there's a priest that becomes involved at some point, and yeah, just some of the things that play out are maybe a bit more, you know, 70s horror tropes like The Exorcist and the Amityville Horror, that kind of thing. But that doesn't mean this was a bad story. This was still a really good story. You know, I really liked the context of it being these, yeah, twin teenage girls. I thought that was really well done. And yeah, the fact that the parents kind of feel really helpless about Julie's situation. You know, they're trying their best to, you know, help her get better or at least make her life comfortable, but they are struggling with the way things are and the way that Julie has been behaving. Yeah, I thought it was really well done on that kind of like the family dynamic side of things. And then, yeah, I thought there were some creepy moments that play out with Julie and the Ouija board. Yeah, I just thought this was a really good, entertaining story. Yeah, I mean, it was entertaining, but it also had, yeah, some kind of dark and emotional moments as well, about, yeah, Julie's plight, as she is, yeah, just really struggling with the way life has panned out for her. Yeah, I just thought this one was a really good take on that classic demonic possession type of story. I gave this one 4 stars. So yeah, that was everything I read in September. Mostly a pretty good reading month, apart from The Girlfriend. Anyway, let me know if you've read any of these. I would love to hear your thoughts. Surprisingly, The Girlfriend doesn't actually have that bad of reviews on Goodreads, so seemingly lots of other people loved it, but it wasn't for me. But yeah, let me know what you've been reading recently. If there's anything that you would recommend, I would love to hear about it. So that's it for now. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video.